Welcome to Below the Line, where we talk about working in Hollywood from the crew perspective. My name is Skid. I'm a former assistant director and your host.
Quiet on the set.
Today, we're talking about The Studio, the Apple TV Plus show starring Seth Rogen as the embattled head of the fictional Continental Studios. And I've got two guests. First, Donald Murphy, first assistant director. Murph, welcome to Below the Line.
Thanks. Great to be here.
Also joining us, camera operator Mark Goellnicht. Mark, welcome. Glad you could join us as well.
Yeah, great to be part of it.
This is going to be a fun episode to talk about. Really enjoyed the show. Warning for listeners, today's conversation will contain spoilers. I would say that this podcast was recorded in one take, but that is probably going to be a lie. Or will it? Kicking us off, when and where was the filming for this show done?
We based ourselves out of Warner Brothers. We shot a lot of it on the lot because that doubled as Continental Studios. Occasionally, obviously, we'd have to go into Los Angeles and shoot around town. And then the final two episodes were shot on location in Las Vegas.
And how did each of you get involved? How did you get pulled into this show?
I had done a couple of shows with Apple prior to this. I did a show called High Desert, and then right after that, a show called Palm Royale. On those two shows, I met a line producer named Jesse Sternbaum, and Jesse was hired to do the studio, and he reached out to me to see if I'd be interested in doing it, and he got me in with Seth and Evan and the showrunners, Pete and Alex, and I interviewed from there.
How about you, Mark?
Yeah, I mean, I came from a recommendation I think someone made to Adam Newport-Barrow, who was the cinematographer on this show, and he was, I think, looking for someone who had extensive experience doing handheld and Steadicam and a lot of camera movement in my background. And I think that's what grabbed his attention. I worked on a movie called Extraction, and I think that sort of caught his attention to how we did those oners on that particular movie. And he thought it could well apply to this, comedy and the approach that Seth Rogen wanted to try and create, and Evan Goldberg, who were directing it, they really wanted to try this idea of being like almost like in a Birdman-esque kind of style. Yeah, so I was drawn into the project that way. And then, when I first interviewed, they kind of weren't sure if they were going to do it entirely handheld or they were going to do it maybe a blend of Steadicam or a blend of something else. And so we did a lot of testing to sort of get there, but we can talk about that a little bit more as we go in. Yeah.
Had either of you guys worked with Seth or Evan before on other projects?
I worked with Seth before on Steve Jobs. I was the first AD for Danny Boyle on that, and Seth was in it. So I had met Seth on that show. I hadn't seen him since, but we seem to remember each other once I met you. But I'd never worked with Seth and or Evan when they were directing before.
And same with me. I had never worked with him before either, so it was a first. It was great to be part of it.
I really enjoyed this show. I don't enjoy a lot of behind the scenes Hollywood stuff in general. I just don't think they quite get it right. But this show manages to be both highbrow concept and lowbrow comedy. And it works in a way. Talk to me about just sort of their approach to the material. Mark, you talked some about the intent on the camera work. Murph, I'm curious sort of what was the approach to putting this show together, and during pre-production, what sort of influences were intentional and what just sort of came out of it?
Well, ultimately, we had 60 days to do the show. And with 10 episodes in mind, we sort of allocated 6 days per episode. That's how genius we are, that we did
Good maths.
came up with a plan. As the scripts came and we realized that some of them needed potentially a little more time than others, we just kind of, robbed from Peter to pay Paul, so to speak, to figure out if 6 per episode was worth it, or maybe this one could be 5 and this one could be 7. So it sort of evolved during the process of prep and, quite honestly, during shooting, because there was actually an episode that we had prepped for some time that we didn't end up doing. They ended up moving on from it and turning the finale into 2 episodes. So we dropped 1 episode along the way. So that freed up some more time to allocate towards Las Vegas, which obviously is a little bit more expensive than shooting in Los Angeles. So it was constantly evolving. But we started the process by assuming everything would be 6 days. And ultimately, the cast drove the entire board because we had so many guest stars and we had to work around their availability constantly. So we sort of just tried to do it as much in script order as possible, but there were times where actors' availability wouldn't allow us to do it. And that was very fluid as well. There were several choices for some of these parts along the way. And as the actors' availability changed, the schedule would change accordingly with the new actor that we found.
Well, and was it always the intention that episodes 2 through 8 could be shuffled? So, folks, if you haven't seen it, episode 1 is clearly the start, and episode 9 and 10 wraps the season. But the other episodes, this show, each episode stands alone and telling its story. And I'm curious how much of that was intentional or just the way it's sorted out.
We kind of had the bones of at least the first 8 scripts. The finale was always something that they were trying to work out throughout the production. We knew it was going to end at CinemaCon. We just didn't assume we were going to be able to shoot CinemaCon in Las Vegas. And that sort of happened during the course of shooting, where we figured we could make that work. I tend as an AD to schedule things in order as much as possible. Because I had the luxury of having all, let's just say, 8 scripts ahead of time, I was able to kind of just do my initial board in order. And then once we knew that, say, Ron Howard was going to be in this episode and Martin Scorsese was going to be in this episode and Sarah Polley, whoever it might be, we just basically presented them this initial board, and they would say, yes, we can make that window work. And then we just fine tuned it from there. There were some times we had to flip it a little bit, but for the most part, as I recall, we did everything more or less in order. The Golden Globes was another one because Seth and Evan were insistent on shooting it in the Hilton, Beverly Hills Hilton, just for authenticity. That the location, even though we had quite a few guest stars in that, the location was a big factor in driving that particular episode.
That was episode 8, where they went to the Golden Globes. Now, Mark, I'm also interested in the sort of intention that came up during pre-production about the camera work. While episode 2, the oner, is getting a lot of attention for being a oner, and we're going to talk some more detail about that, there's a definite intentionality around the camera work throughout the season. And while each episode might have a certain element or a certain thing that they're playing with, talk to me about the overall approach to the camera work on this show.
I think the overall camera work was based on the idea of keeping it this one continuous flowing camera that moved with the actors and moved around in the scene, flowing with what was this center or the focus of the particular scene. So if that person was the focus, we would be kind of like seeing it from that person's point of view. And so one of the things that Seth Rogen and Evan Goldberg, who were directing it, they definitely wanted to make it feel like the audience was part of the conversation and part of the scene. And one of the things that they knew was the best way to do that is it immerse the camera into the scene and make it feel part of it, rather than being observational from like sort of like a and separated from the scene. He wanted to make it more visceral and be part of it and feel engaged with each of the actors, so you could feel exactly how they were feeling in that moment. So we tried a number of different techniques to sort of see what would work, because we didn't want to draw too much attention to the actual camera work. We wanted it to feel somewhat real and live, and it's like a docudrama, if you like, but without it being jolting that you're so taken out of it because the camera's shaking so much. So we had to sort of come up with this happy medium of smooth handheld camera work as opposed to, completely stable, smooth steady cam or stable, smooth, remote head on a gyroscopic head. That he really, after, many times of, testing different rigs and different systems, both Adam Newport-Bearer, the cinematographer, and the directors, they felt that the best way to shoot this was almost like just raw handheld on the shoulder and running with the actors and moving with them as they moved and staying within their proximity, in close proximity, so that you always felt you were part of it. And I think soon as we broke away from that, and we did occasionally, we did go to crane shots and we did use other, methods of moving the camera, but we always came back to that feeling of keeping it very sort of live and handheld and keeping that continuous feel as well. So like if it was, we're panning, it's like, it's a whip pan to that person or whatever it is. It's to keep you involved and engaged and to feel like there was no other trick to it. We didn't edit some piece out or it was one continuous shot. Hopefully that explains it.
Well, and so, Mark, I'm assuming then that means, is there even a second camera? I mean, you really don't have,
No,
you're actually dancing with the actors through the whole thing.
that was intentional. They just definitely didn't want to do it with two cameras. And, yes, we did have a second camera available to go onto a gimbal, but it was always done. We always shot the whole entire series as a single camera, continuous take per scene. And, even though we used some stitches, obviously, in the oner, when we get to talking about that, there were some movie making tricks that we used, but the intention was to flow right through with a continuous shot, as one continuous take. And we would rehearse it that way and we would, actually film in that way so that we could just keep that flow. And I think it worked very, very, very well for most of this, series. As I said, some of the episodes we did, which, like the oner and also the first episode, were particularly much longer takes of continuous shots that didn't get cut with a scene end or whatever.
Mark, correct me if I'm wrong. The only time I remember having a second camera crew available to us was when Martin Scorsese was working.
That's right.
That was the first episode. To those of you who've seen it, you know that. But Marty's in the first episode in a couple of scenes. I feel I can call him Marty. Not sure why. Seth and Evan weren't quite sure how he, the master director, would react to the fact that we were shooting it this way, the way that Mark just described. And so I think they just wanted to make sure that they made his stay with us as comfortable as possible in every way. So in case he was questioning it and he wasn't down with doing it the way they did it, they had this in their back pocket as a backup. And Seth and Evan have talked about that many times in the interviews they've done. And we never had to do it. He was totally game to do it the way we were doing it. And he came in, it was great. He seems to really enjoy acting.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Murph, I'm curious with this approach to the camera work, how that changes the work you're doing as the first AD. In other words, talk to me about what might be different than traditional on set.
Well, when I first heard that this is the way we were going to do it, I was surprised actually, because it's not the standard way of shooting a comedy. I've done plenty of long take shots over the years as an AD, so I'm kind of used to understanding how we're going to go about pulling them off in terms of rehearsing and setting the background for them and whatnot. But quite honestly, as it turned out, doing it this way, I think sort of saved us as far as time was concerned. Once we got into a rhythm with it, which we did pretty quickly, quite honestly, it kind of saved the board, so to speak. I think the days went much more efficiently and quicker because of this methodology, where you would think like, oh God, how are we going to do this particular scene and get what we need to get when we're shooting 8 to 10 pages a day, and by doing it as one shot. Because going into it, I thought, if this doesn't go well, how are we going to get all the material that we need without having anything to cut to? But quite honestly, I think we nailed it, and it was a pleasant surprise. And I spoke to Adam about this quite a bit, and we both recognized that there was no way we would have been able to get this schedule in time without doing it this way. It just worked out that way. As far as my approach to it, it's just like any other scene. I mean, you bring the actors up, you rehearse it, and you kind of I guess the only difference is, from my experience, is that you would rehearse the scene typically, and then after the actors and the directors, Seth and Evan in this case, figure out the blocking, they would step off, and then Adam, Mark, and the directors would work out the shots. In this case, the camera department was always on set with the rehearsal. Mark was there, sometimes the ACs were there, obviously Adam was there, and the blocking and the camera work would sort of be part of the same rehearsal. It wouldn't be a separation between the two. The actors would adjust during the rehearsal to what Adam and Mark thought that the camera would want to do. So we were working out all of those things simultaneously, as opposed to there being a little bit of a delay in figuring out the coverage, so to speak, because it was just one shot. Yeah, my approach wasn't much different. And as far as like background and things like that, we can talk about that later. But ultimately, it's just like any other master. You just set the background for what the camera ultimately ends up doing.
So, Mark, tell me more about what the technology you're using. You talked about a handheld and some gimbal work. I'm not familiar with how things have changed maybe with the cameras themselves. That's got to be the hardest job in Hollywood, is being your first AC if you're trying to keep focus through all of this and all this moving around. Or does the technology help in some of these ways to give you more flexibility?
Definitely don't want to take away the difficulty of the focus for trying to tackle the challenge of how we shot this entire series. It was incredibly, incredibly difficult for our first assistant camera person, who was, Lucas Deans, who did an absolutely amazing job. And, just very, you really have to be on your toes, because even, the timing is everything in a show like this, when it's coming down to comedy and the gags working, and the camera in the approach was almost acting as the editor, as you can imagine, because I'm actually panning the camera to an actor's reaction or response, or they come back to a line that if I'm not quite getting to that person exactly at the right time, or seeing their grin or their smirk on their face, the joke wouldn't land. And then we would have to redo it just for that timing, just because it's to do with the timing of the panning, or the way the camera moves into that person or whatever. So that also influenced the focus, that influenced, there was also lighting that was involved. The grips were constantly dancing around me as well to try and get bounce boards in, and getting, lights that could be reflected into, our actresses' faces to make them look, obviously a bit well better lit than if they were just stuck in a corner. So there was this constant dance, which, Murph would probably also see from afar as well, that we had to all work out the geography of where I was moving, where that bounce board grip had to be, or where the focus puller had to be, to see what was going on. And so this whole dance had to be choreographed and rehearsed many, many times before we could actually physically get the actors in. So we do it many, many times with second team. Just to explain what second team is, it's just, a group of actors that are going through the paces of what the actors actually are going to do. And we would often do a lot of the blocking and the rehearsing with that second team to work out what's going to work out the best for the shot, and then almost show that to the actors. Hey, this is what's going to work the best. And it's usually that done in reverse, that the actors set the path of what they're going to do. But in this case, a lot of the time we had to do it the other way around. And Murph, you might have something to say about that as well, as far as within the blocking.
To Mark's point with second team, being a stand-in is not an easy job. And quite honestly, it's hard to find really good ones, especially when you're shooting the show this way, because these guys were passing the camera from floor to floor. They're moving from a crane into like a Ronin mode on the fly. And we had to work it out with second team doing 2, sometimes 3, maybe even more minute-long takes. And to get the second teamers, who are inexperienced actors, and it's hard to get them to nail all the specific details of the blocking. So we had some good ones, and we had some that were less experienced, and so it was harder to work the shots out with second team on occasion. But thankfully, the main cast, being Seth and Ike and Catherine Hahn and Chase, those four were there most of the time. And then Catherine O'Hara would come in on a lot of occasions as well. But any of those five I just mentioned would always be willing to work out the details of the blocking ahead of us actually rolling on it. They were just really cool. And if we needed like Ike to come in and take the place of his second team, because Ike's movement was a little more complicated than maybe the other three or four in the scene, Ike would be happy to do it. So that gave us a nice advantage over some of the other sets that I've worked on. All that being said, a lot of times what was nice, again, I'm standing there, I'm calling the roll, and then I'm watching and enjoying what I'm seeing. And Mark and all these guys are doing all the heavy lifting, like the dances. I find that fascinating to watch still, having done this for 25, 30 years, that watching the way some of these guys can pull off some of these dances is just really cool to watch in person. Anyhow, ultimately, it was nice because the long takes, we had this kind of magic number of 16. It seemed like whenever we got towards take 16, that's when we really started to have it dialed in. And then from 16 on, we were just really fine tuning it to make it really, really great. But there was always something, whether it was something the camera, as Mark mentioned, wasn't panning at the right time, or an actor would go up on their line, or an extra would just look dumb in the background and not really moving with the flow of the scene. We were able to rehearse constantly as we rolled. So we got to that point prior with the stand-ins and with sometimes first team helping us get to that point where we felt confident enough to roll. And then after that, we were still kind of rehearsing. It was kind of cool in a way. It gave us a lot more freedom, I think. There was no pressure to get it right on the first take. Seth would constantly say, it's the first take. We always fuck that one up. And then we would just move on. Don't worry about it. Like he especially, because he was clearly the main guy, even though we had Evan there and Pete and Alex, the showrunners. It kind of ran through Seth. He was such a good presence and such a loose guy that it just kind of made the whole process fun. And we were able to just figure it out when we figured it out. And it worked out really well.
Yeah, definitely. And, one of the most difficult things was getting over the shame of when you actually messed up. And like when in the first couple of episodes, or first episode, I suppose, when we were shooting the first one, it really was stressful, and so much so to the point where I don't know if you remember this, Murph, but there was one day that I almost felt like I wanted to throw up because I was so nervous. And it was when we were shooting with Ron Howard. We were doing this long, and it literally ran for 8.5 minutes, this one take that we had to do, where we started in Seth's office, which is, Matt Remick's office, and, had to go down these stairs, through this glass wall, down the corridor, across the entire, like office floor to the meeting conference room. And then we had to do this incredibly timed dance where part of the actual conference table had to be pulled out. So we pulled it out, and we had like this donut table that allowed us to for me to weave inside it to then get into these positions to shoot, Ron Howard, who's talking, and then all the other characters that were in that scene in the note. It was actually the note episode, actually. And the timing on each of those actors when they were saying what they had to say, and the nuance of it was incredibly detailed, and to the point where I was having to learn not just the lines of each actor, but the pauses, and learning that on that second pause of that second, whatever it is, that's when I would pan, or so the detail was, as I said, it almost made my head explode. But I was so nervous, and I said to Seth, "I'm worried." And he goes, "Don't worry about it. If we blow it, it'll be fine. We'll just go again. I said, but it's Ron Howard. Like, I don't want to, like, and I was like, I created this huge, like, nervousness over, because, here we are working with this iconic actor like Ron and director, I should say, and the pressure of all of that, as well as the physicality of what we were trying to do and everyone else dancing around it. It was a lot. And I just remember, I think we ended up on Murph, we went 23 or 24 takes for that one sequence.
Yeah, I'm not just saying this because Mark is on the podcast here. He's really the MVP of the show. I mean, the amount of takes we did, and he's constantly doing it more or less handheld. I mean, there are a few times he's on the
Yeah.
the wheels while Jesse, our Ronin, would he be called a Ronin operator, or Ronin tech? But
Yeah.
the two of them together, like working in tandem the way they did, it was quite remarkable what they pulled off with these shots, as well as obviously the grip department and Adam, our DP, and conceiving all of these. But I think about that table so many times, and sometimes shots like the one are moving through a house and following all this blocking as somebody walks through a big house is one thing, but trying to pull off the timing of five people sitting around a conference room table delivering dialogue for 8 pages, it's seemingly more of a challenge for an operator to time all that and nail it. Plus, you have to keep in mind that I'd say 75% of it is scripted, maybe less, and they're improvising. So Mark's trying to figure out the timing off actors improvising to nail the comedy. You could probably tell that these guys are all comedic actors and they're going to throw in a few zinger lines that aren't on the page, and Mark's got to try and figure out the timing of that stuff at the same time. It was quite challenging, and there were times we needed to do a few. And it's funny that you say Seth's like, don't worry about it, we'll just go again, and where they're just throwing these lines out and having a blast and doing a play where Mark's like got this huge camera on this thing trying to, okay, I'll do 40 takes of this with this whatever pound camera on my shoulder trying
Yeah.
to figure all the timing of it while you guys are just having a blast. It's really funny.
That was one of the, more challenging episodes for sure. And I think, going into some of the technical questions you had before, Skid, about, the devices we used in the first episode, we did a lot of cool tricks where the shot would start on a vehicle, Seth's, Matt Remick's fancy convertible car that he would be driving to set. And there was that famous scene where we get out. He's going to see Catherine O'Hara's character, Patty, to, explain that he's got the new job and, all that sort of thing. And he rolls up to the house and it's, going up this long driveway to then the shot from when he parks his convertible, he gets out and we go to the front door. And that whole entire sequence was done with the assistance again of our big camera operator Jesse Kane, who was in the back seat of the car holding the camera as it came in, and it was still kind of almost moving, settling to a stop. I then took the camera off his shoulder and then onto my shoulder, seamlessly using the movement of Seth as he gets out, so it sort of looks naturally, to bury that little bit of transfer over. But we did that all live and then walked straight through to the front door, and then Patty opens the door, Catherine O'Hara, and then we went straight into that same scene. That was a really cool trick that was thought out again, ahead of time by Adam Newport-Bearer, who was excellent at working this out with the grips as well and nutting it out with how we can lo-fi technology. So we weren't using anything super high tech, but in that case, it worked so effective. And there were other times we also used that same idea where we were on the vehicle and then we came off the vehicle using a gimbal rig, the Ronin, which has the ability to be locked onto the vehicle using like a magnet that attaches to it. And then we were able to release that magnet, take the gimbal off, and it all seamlessly move the camera and blend it into this handheld shot. And again, that would be in mimic mode. I would be able to operate it remotely, and Jesse would be disengaging the actual Ronin and moving it through the scene, and then we'd find a place where we either could stitch to then go to real handheld. So that was some of the techniques that we used for those vehicle to walking shots that we did many times in this show. And we also did several of what would you call it, shots that went from a crane on the gimbal to walking again through, at ground level, and then we'd do that transition as well. So we use technology in that way to sort of like allow the camera to get to great heights or get onto a vehicle or whatever. But we would try and again keep it fairly low. We didn't want to make it super complicated. We wanted to keep it grounded in that sort of handheld feel.
I want to go deeper with you guys specifically to start with episode 2, as we talked about the oner. Murph, earlier you suggested that in some ways that was simpler than some of the complicated shots from other scenes. But if it was simple, everybody would be doing it. And so I want to get some sense about when you get the script for, we're going to do this oner, what is the approach and how pulling that off of an episode long shot, kind of what goes into it and what you guys did specifically.
I guess when we first started, or I first started in prep, it was pretty apparent that we were going to approach the entire season as a lot of long takes. The oner, for some reason, still stood out because in the early stages of prep, I didn't really have any real idea of how we were going to approach these long takes. So when I read the script for the oner, and we hadn't chosen a house yet, my immediate reaction is that we are literally going to shoot the entire episode as one shot, that we're not going to stitch it in any way. And again, this is because of the early part of prep. That's the only concept I had of really any of these script/scenes. This one read that way, like it was just going to be one long take. So that being said, I wouldn't say I panicked, but I wondered how we were going to be able to pull this off. But I was psyched about it, because it's fun for an AD to plan it and also set background for it, because that the pressure's on you as an AD to kind of set the background in a way that looks as good as the actors blocking themselves. And the background, of course, isn't quite as experienced at that kind of thing as actors are. So anyhow, we always knew that this was something that we were going to have to plan more than the other episodes. This is, again, in the early stages of prep. So I pushed it to the latter part of the board. And we had a hiatus scheduled in the board, a planned hiatus of, I think it was a week, maybe a hair longer, if I recall. So I figured I would use that week of downtime for the art department to wrap the stage or do whatever they needed to do to rebuild something, whatever it might be. Seth to have a break, the actors to have a break, certainly Mark to have a break because of all of his heavy lifting. Anyhow, and I knew I could use that hiatus for a chance for us to rehearse it. By then we would have a location picked, and this is 2/3 of the way through the schedule. We would have a location picked and we'd be able to get, hopefully, the actors up there to walk through it, to kind of fine tune it with camera and figure out what we were going to do so that when we had the 5 days or so to shoot it, we would be able to maximize that time because we had prepped it so much. And as our process evolved during the first, 6 weeks of the show or whatever it was, I realized we kind of have this down now. We kind of we've been doing this for a while, and doing the oner is just like, it's just another oner, and we've kind of figured out how visual effects would come into play and stitch some things together. So I knew it was going to be a little bit easier than we initially thought to do it. We went to the house a few times, A, to pick it, and B, to walk through and figure it out. But Seth and Evan and the showrunner Pete and Alex, myself, we would work through the scenes together by reading the lines. Seth obviously playing himself. Evan would play Ike. I would play Quinn. Pete would play Catherine Hahn, Maya's character. And they would figure out the blocking that way. That's the way we kind of did it before we ever brought the actors in for any rehearsal. So we just did that same thing for the oner. And then we realized, okay, this is the path that they're going to take. So we knew Seth and Ike were going to arrive in the car. They're going to walk through the house and come across all this chaos along the way and eventually end up in the car. So we mapped out the path ahead of time. During this one day we had at the house during the hiatus. And then when we got there on the set, we just kind of walked the actors through the paces. What we determined, because of the nature of of not only it being a oner, but it being a oner at magic hour, was that the house wasn't really conducive because of the way it was an open space to shooting at any time during the day. So on the day we got there to start shooting the beginning of it, we realized that we could use 8 hours of our 12 hours of time there to just rehearse it more and more and more and more, and then just shoot it during that magic hour window. So we rehearsed the hell out of that one, as opposed to the other episodes or other shots where we didn't have the luxury of, not even the luxury, almost the misfortune of having a house or a location where we couldn't do it because it didn't work for the concept of the scene. It had to be in low light. And so it just kind of fell into place that way. And I think a lot of the show did. I think it was a very spontaneous, on the day kind of figuring out. But because nobody was really like overly nervous or, in panic mode all the time, everybody was pretty level headed. We were able to do it without too much fuss. It was kind of miraculous, quite honestly. It was pretty great. Yeah, we just winged it a lot of the times, and it ended up turning out the way it did. And that's a credit to Seth and Evan. They do have a very low key, calm way of going about the process. They've like, if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. We'll figure it out the next time, And everybody kind of followed their lead, and it sort of fell into place.
Yeah, I agree. I think the calmness that Seth and Evan have on set it permeates through to the crew as well as the other cast members. And I know that Sarah Pauly was such a delight to work with because she just came so well prepared. And, I don't think she ever faltered, ever, did she, Murph? She was
No,
like
she's a really good
straight
actor.
out of the gates, very good. I mean, I was amazed that we never really had to go again because Sarah fluffed something or messed up the blocking or any of that. If anything, she added some excitement to it each time, and her improvisation was amazing. I think what Murph said about the rehearsing, I enjoyed the amount of rehearsing we did for that one, more so than anything else we did on the show, because it made us focus really clearly on all the technical side and the blocking and the rhythm and the speed, and like even down to, we were timing how long different sections would be, and would go, oh no, we need to make that 30 seconds tighter or whatever. And remember that, Murph? We were sort of changing the timing in our rehearsal process, which I felt really benefited when we actually did record and we did do these takes, because it kind of kept it tighter and more succinct and more energetic. It didn't get bogged down, and that was what I loved about that whole rehearsal process. Plus that, the adrenaline of having to shoot live almost, if you like, for those, the golden hour or the magic hour of light. Everyone can see that you can't mess up, or you've got to get this right, because you literally can see the light is going down like it is in the story. It put that pressure on all of us to get it right. And it, I don't know, it just elevated everyone to get to that point where there was that importance on putting it into that 2 hours of where we could actually get it perfectly right. It was good.
Yeah, and there was like one or two occasions where within the confines of the house where we, let's just say for argument's sake, we had 10 pieces to get the episode, the two car pieces on each end, and then 8 shots or so in the middle. I might be wrong, but just for this discussion, there might have been 2 shots in there that we knew, 2 chunks of time that we were trying to get to stitch together that were like confined to, say, the kitchen. And we were able to potentially shoot one or two of those prior to that 5 to 7 window or whatever we were picking. And we might have done that, and that was like the first day. And then on the second day, we were just we figured out this process of doing everything in the last 2 hours, and it's sort of just like, yeah, sure, it might be a little more pressure and a little more difficult, but let's just do it that way because it's what the episode is asking for. So even though we were in little confined spaces at times where we could get something, we just decided, let's not isolate that and shoot it at noon. Let's just add it to the piece before it or after it and shoot it in the last 2 hours of the day, as well as everything else. So it's just like we were almost getting cocky.
Yeah. Yeah.
We were just like, yeah, let's just do it this way. Let's just do, because it's better. You're doing longer takes and you're not relying on the stitch or whatever it might be. So we made the takes a little bit longer and we shot them in that magic hour. But like I said, these guys really just nailed it. That was a very tricky episode to do. And it's one of my favorites, quite honestly. It turned out really, really great. Yeah, it was a lot of fun to do, but there were some surprises along the way.
How many days did you plan for this episode?
Yeah, we shot it in 4 days.
Okay.
4 days, yeah.
Yeah. We thought maybe we were going to use one day as just a rehearsal day. Again, it evolved. Like, we're going to rehearse for 5 days during the hiatus. Oh, no, we're not going to do that because we don't need to. Oh, well, why don't we just do one full rehearsal day of the whole thing and then go in the next 4 days and shoot? Well, let's just go in there and just do it. Yeah, that's sort of Seth and Evan. After a while, they just sort of like, let's not do that. We don't need to rehearse it. We'll just figure it out on the day,
Huh.
Yeah, we did it in 4. And if I think I had that at 6 in the original board, I thought this is going to take 6 days, and we ended up doing it in 4, so we could throw another day or two in Las Vegas.
Well, talking about some of the specific challenges of pulling off that episode, one question I had, and Mark, I think you alluded to this answer already, but the idea of filming on the moving car and it going seamlessly into the walk through the house. Was that what did you call it? The Ronin setup or something? Is that what you used to do that? Or is there something else more complicated going on here?
Yeah, no, that was exactly what we did on that particular episode, was that we started on the Ronin. It was, attached to the vehicle, and it's bookended basically. It starts the episode with, them driving up, and then it ends with them driving away. And we used the same kind of rig for both setups, and it was this gimbal rig, which is called the Ronin, that's just the proprietary name, but it's allows the camera to be stabilized, and as the car and vehicle is moving in a very rough manner up the driveway, it stabilizes the shot. But I then also have the ability to then pan and tilt and do everything remotely using this like mimic of me having it on my shoulder. So I would therefore create some movement that would naturally happen if I was handheld. And then as Jesse took the rig off the vehicle, we unmagnetized it and then unlocked it and moved it into a position where we could then seamlessly stitch it through to a real handheld shot. And then that's where the shot would then carry on. And that's how we sort of managed to use that technology for some of it, go back to the regular handheld for the entire episode until the very end, when we then get back on the vehicle again. It was that run from Greta leaving the house, me, walking down, and then we did a stitch again with back into the Ronin, and then got back on into the car. So it was that process that we kind of used in this episode, and it worked really, really well, except for there was a couple of little technical glitches that we didn't foresee happen, which actually created a little bit of a rough spot. I don't know if you remember, Murph, we had one of the nights when we were trying to get that last shot, we had a number of technical glitches because of the signal dropping out and things like that. But they're the things that you just have to, work through and come up with quick problem solving. And we managed to still get it at the last, dying minutes of the light going down. So that was a little bit stressful that night. I'm definitely have to say that about that last shot.
for sure. That was, I think we did that on a Thursday. I think our week was Tuesday through Friday because of the house availability.
Yeah.
And then on Thursday, we kind of shot in order. So on the first day, Tuesday, we got the drive up to the house, and then we did all the work in the house. And then at the end of the day, Thursday, we wanted to get the drive away from the house because we just felt it was smart to have two cracks at it in the event something went wrong. So we scheduled it to shoot that end piece on Thursday at magic hour, and maybe a little, almost like pushing it a little bit towards night, because that's how the episode ends when they don't get the shot. So on Thursday, yeah, we did put it all together and we tried to go out and do it, and it just didn't work out because we were having some, as Mark mentioned, technical difficulties. But we knew we had Friday as well in our back pocket to give it another shot. And as it turned out, we did need to do it on Friday. And at that point, we're just like, okay, now we have to get it. But at least we had a trial run at it on Thursday. But again, it's just so fascinating to watch the process of how these guys pulled it off. Like even the drive up to the house, we've got a van ahead of the car. We've got the camera on the hood of the car attached magnetically. Seth is free driving through Silver Lake in the hills, and we're in a van ahead of him, and we're driving ahead of him. And Seth drives pretty quickly, so we're trying to keep a distance that enables the signal from the van where Mark is in there operating as needed, and being able to get a signal so everybody can watch the takes. And the van's driving ahead of the car through the hills of Silver Lake. And then we had to go past the driveway entrance. Seth goes up the driveway and he ends up at the top of the driveway, where we're all sitting at the bottom of the driveway, still recording, hoping that the signal reaches from the bottom of the driveway to the top of the driveway. And then same thing on the way out, where we had to have the lead vehicle close enough to the camera for the transition from handheld onto the hood of the car. But we also can't allow that camera to see the transmitter vehicle in the shot ahead of time. So we had to pull forward about 6 car lengths around the corner so we wouldn't see the car, but not so far that we wouldn't be able to get the signal. So we were always dancing with technology on those 2 shots. And it was just so cool to see how we ultimately ended up pulling it off. Again, I'm just riding in the car and yelling rolls and they're doing all the hard work.
Well, tell me where some of the stitch places were, if it's not proprietary or a big secret. Like, because again, it's almost irresponsible not to have some idea of where you're going to be able to stitch it together. In fact, it's a gag in the script that they do things like this to make a scene like this actually work. So I'm curious which ones, Murph, you planned ahead, or which ones you just knew you were going to get caught or got caught because of the way you filmed it.
Mark, you tell me if I'm wrong here. I don't think we really planned them ahead. I think we worked out the blocking of the whole sequence, as I said, during that hiatus week. And then as we got on set and fine-tuned said blocking, we ran it as far as we could during the rehearsal period, and then realized, okay, this would be a good place for the stitch when we transitioned from Seth to Sarah on a pan or whatever it might be. We just sort of said, this is how far we'll do it. And that's where we picked the stitch point and worked with the editor, who was on set all the time, and visual effects. Sandro, our visual effects coordinator, was there all the time to help guide us through the stitching, with working with Adam and Seth and Evan and figuring out that this would work the best. I don't remember planning well ahead of time where we were going to stitch things. Do you, Mark?
Yeah, I mean, the stitches we definitely worked out after we'd rehearsed all the way through a particular take, and we'd work out that, okay, at a certain point, whether it was going through a doorway or we were going into the back of an actor, or we would work out that what's going to look visually the most interesting to stitch on. And often it wasn't just on a pan. It was, for example, going into, it would be a wipe of someone, or it would be a wipe through a doorway, or it would be and this was a technique that you've seen in other films like 1917 and all, these sort of films that have used stitches and different transitions in other ways. We borrowed some of those ideas as well, particularly in like the first episode where we were going through from outside Continental Studios into the inside set. We did a stitch through a glass door, and we used that transition. So we tried to be as artistic and creative as we could to make it less obvious, that, oh, okay, they just did it on the pan, or whatever. So, and we definitely applied that to the oner episode where we tried to integrate it into the natural way that we were shooting the shot. Like, and for example, when Seth was walking out of the dressing room after speaking to Greta, we moved into the back of Seth. And then as he walks out, we blended into another take, which is him carrying on his walk. And you wouldn't even know because it just doesn't feel like the shot ever stopped. You know what I mean? Those sort of tricks we used as Murph said, with consultation with our visual effects guy, Sandro, and also our editor, we were able to work out the timing and, okay, that pan needed to be faster, or the movement into it needs to be quicker or slower or whatever. So it just matches on the other side. So we always thought of an A and B side of each shot.
When Seth walks into the shot and you turn around to see that they're filming, are those background crew or do you have actual crew, or is that actually you or another operator? It's so quick. Was that part of your background group, Murph, or were there like, let's get some crew over here because we're going to pan into this?
That was our crew. That was Jesse, our operator.
Yeah, that's right.
We had our actual boom person in the shot. I don't think Lucas was there, but we had because he had his monitor and we couldn't right there, so he had to be working off the monitor. But there were 2 or 3 actual crew members there, and that was one of the advantages of doing a show about behind the scenes of Hollywood, is that I could always blend the real crew or the real equipment into the shot constantly to help us add a little more production value to it, and it made things. And as an AD, you don't have to worry about a crew member walking into the shot. You know what I mean? You don't like, oh, they're going to ruin the take by walking in there. It's like, it doesn't matter. It's just another cross. So we had obviously the period dressed extras there for it. I think we had 15 to 20 of them in the scene. And then I think we probably added another 10 crew members into the mix so we could rely on using them for crosses rather than grabbing a gripper and electrician and saying, hey, can you do this cross for us, because we're short of people. It's funny that whenever we did put crew into the shot, they were always pretty game to do it, and there's quite a few cameos of the crew, myself included, in the season. Seth and Evan like having the crew do little bit parts or crosses or things like that. I understand why it is now I work behind the scenes rather than in front of camera. So yeah, it was the real crew. It was the real crew for those particular people. But most of the background in that scene are our background.
Another area I question is sometimes the camera goes to the monitors and we see Greta acting the scene, but on the monitors, are we actually running live monitor, or is that going to be filled in post?
No, that was done live. We actually filmed all of that sequence live. And this is where the timing that Murph and his team, Denise as a second, their timing of when they had to start particular pieces of that sequence was so perfect. And it had to be perfect, and it had to be live in the monitor, because as I panned off that monitor and saw the actual camera going past, down that corridor, it had to all be in sync. It couldn't be, oh, okay, we'll just do that later in post. It had to be in sync because otherwise it wouldn't have been real. So it was a real testament to the timing of, the ADs getting that all queued up, and also the background had to be exactly in the same place that they had to be each take, because if we did do any stitches, it had to then blend, so it was from a point of view of precision background, I've never been part of something that's been so precisely orchestrated by not only the ADs but everyone from lighting to having all those cues exactly right, and having the video live on those monitors, I think, was integral for that scene to work. Otherwise, the actors wouldn't have been reacting the right way, or all that sort of thing. So it had to all be real and live.
Well, another one, maybe back to you, Murph. How did you guys pull off the gag of Seth's character, Matt, going down on the table and then coming up with blood all over his face.
Yeah, that we obviously had to do that as a stitch. We had a stunt guy for Seth. I
Okay.
think I wasn't there for it, but it's a similar moment in the pediatric oncologist episode where Seth, his character, does a header on the table after he's broken his finger. I happened to have COVID at the time, so I wasn't there to shoot that particular one. Anyhow, yeah, it was just a replacement thing. I don't remember the exact stitch we did. I think he's caught in the shot, and he darts away. There's a cut somewhere in there, and then we just it's probably a pan if I recall correctly, and then we replace him with the stuntman who's like kind of we're on his back, and he's like, oh yeah, roll, reset. He's doing whatever he's saying, and then he takes the header, and then I remember, and Mark, you could probably explain this better than me. That point where we had to transition from the stuntman hitting the floor and staying more or less on him, but replacing Seth there, we ran into a little bit of not trouble, but it was a little bit more complicated to figure out the transition back to Seth because we just would put him down there, we put blood on his face, and then when he got up, we revealed him. But I think we did a pan up to Ike maybe as he's coming to help him up, and then came back down.
I think it was actually to Sarah Pooley as she came in.
Sarah, was it
And
Sarah? Okay.
yeah, I did a whip up to see her
Yeah.
reacting and then back down to Seth, and then that was the real Seth.
That particular stitch, I think, was a little bit trickier to dial in, if I recall correctly. For some reason, I'm not sure why, but
Yeah, because you've got to get the angles right and
mm-hmm.
the background have to be in exactly the same place and all of that. So it
Seth's position on the floor
yeah.
had to be shifted a lot. Yeah, so it was a little bit more work to do, but we nailed it.
Yeah, it was good. Seemed to work well. That's fun.
Well, again, this episode's getting a lot of attention. I think all of it worked well. But let's take the precision you guys talk about in pulling this off, compare that with the challenges you faced with episodes 9 and 10, the two-parter that you said was filmed on location in Las Vegas.
The biggest challenge I found shooting in Las Vegas was when we were ready to shoot, we always had to find Mark at the tables. He was always gambling and we could never get him.
Ah,
out.
that's so funny.
I kid. Well, as far as the logistics of it, Vegas was challenging because we were shooting in a live casino. We were shooting at a big live casino, the Venetian. They were very accommodating until they weren't. We kind of went in with a rough plan. We knew the areas we could shoot and for how long. There were many times where things were being adjusted on the fly. For instance, when we were shooting over by the canals, we had a 2.5 hour window to shoot. So we scheduled it accordingly to go in there at 10 and be done by 12:30 because of some event that was happening in that particular area. And then when we got there and we started to figure out what we were doing, they would come up to me and say we had to be out of there by 11:30. And we were trying to do a stunt. And then so I'm like, okay, how are we going to pull this off? And I would go to Evan and I'd be like, well, now they're telling us we have an hour less to do it. And we just moved quicker. We just figured it out. So a lot of Vegas was on the fly, especially when we were dealing with the casino. The sweet part of it for the party, once we were in there, and it was pretty much like any other shooting set. But shooting in more public areas, the casino floor, the canals, out front, whatever it might be, they were restricting us kind of on the fly a little bit more than we thought. Like I said, they were very open to us doing there, and they gave us the freedom, but the freedom came with some spontaneous, restrictions, and that made things like a little bit more pressure filled. But yeah, that all worked out.
Yeah, I feel like it was definitely a more challenging in the sense of the physicality of the whole, that section because we were also trying to string very long sections. We were trying to see a lot of the casino. We were trying to see a lot of the spaces. So it became like a bit of an athletics event, I felt like at times, like where we were chasing after Bryan Cranston's character or, it became an interesting pacing, I suppose, different to when we were shooting the other episodes. And I think Seth and Evan really wanted to invoke this sense of tension and that there was this race, like we were constantly chasing the, where has Brian's character gone, and where's, and this panic the whole time. that was evoked through the camera and then also through the blocking. We just kept everything moving very, very fast.
And the casino is working. You know what I mean? It's like when we first arrive on the casino floor after they leave the party to look for Bryan Cranston, and we do that shot. I think we're on a fresco on the ceiling, and we come down and we reveal them all, and then they scatter off in different directions. We have background filtered into that, maybe 30, 40 background that we have as part of the scene. But the casino is also working. So we're working around the real
Yeah.
as well as the background. So I'm trying to set background within the working casino, and we're trying to shoot within the working casino. So you just never know when someone's just going to come ambling through the shot or just sitting there watching what we're doing. They didn't give us an area, cordon it off, and just say, have at it. We were literally just having at it like we were a guerrilla filmmaking team trying to get this stuff and pull it off, and we would block the scene within the actual existing bar or the existing tables. They gave us a table, like 3 or 4 tables to work with, but everything on the periphery was all like working casino, so it was kind of an interesting way to do it where we didn't have complete control.
The lack of control in an environment like that. And again, there's something about the spirit of the show that I can see you embracing it, but I don't know, were there other ideas when you were back in prep about how maybe to you said you didn't know you were necessarily going to do it in Vegas when we started. Is that something that evolved, the idea of actually doing the CinemaCon in Vegas?
I'm trying to remember like the early versions of the script for that. Because as I said, episode 10 was CinemaCon. Episode 9 was something else. And then ultimately, as they were writing, fine-tuning episode 10, they realized that logistically we were going to need a little bit more time to do it. Shooting in a casino, the stunt that happens at the end with Brian's character dropping to the ground. The party scene was quite a bit of page count to pull off. Moving around the casino, I think Zoe's character makes mention of the fact that, why is this place so big? And it's like moving from one place to another in a casino takes a long time because casinos are so huge. So just time-wise, we felt like we weren't going to have enough time to pull off the finale in the 5 days we had left. So I think as a production evolved back in LA, we realized, toward Seth and Evan and Jesse, the line producer, and James Weaver, the producer, realized that something's got to give here. So the ninth episode was kind of put on hold, and they realized they would take the time that we had allotted for the ninth episode and make the finale just a little bit bigger. It gave them a little more room to expand it, yet at the same time, not so much that it was going to be 15 days. I think we did it in 7. Anyhow, so yeah, that was a tricky process to kind of fit it all in. And there was like a scene or two in Vegas that they ended up not shooting. They were very simple scenes. They weren't necessary, and they made the smart decision not to spend the time moving to and shooting those moments. But yeah, it was challenging. I've shot in casinos before here in LA and elsewhere, and normally you would have a little bit more control over the area. The casino's never going to shut down for a film production unless maybe you're Steven Spielberg, but we were not as isolated, contained, and controlled as my past experiences.
Other favorites, either specific scenes or certain episodes?
The Golden Globes episode was probably a very different episode to all the others. I would say that stands out as a very different style to the rest of the show.
That episode 8, where they're actually at the Golden Globes, and
Yeah.
you talk about the guest stars or people playing themselves, you're packed with folks in both active and background roles throughout that episode.
Yeah, and again, it was beautiful cohesion between background performances that Murph and his team created, and dealing with the camera trying to weave in and out of this manic crowd, as and getting the right timing. And then we've got the expertise of Catherine O'Hara and Seth Rogen doing their bits. To me, I really loved this episode a lot in the way we tackled the visual style of it. I felt like it really stood out in the sense that it had a good combination of like beautiful sweeping crane shots that sort of let you see and feel the immense epicness of the Golden Globes, because there is something that you can't fake. You've got to really create that atmosphere of a really massive gala. And from the time the episode starts in the limousine with Seth, we seamlessly go from the limousine again using a trick where we move the camera through the vehicle into walking through the red carpet. I really just loved that whole blocking and feel of like the craziness of it all and how it showed all the aspects of the Golden Globes in that entrance and then leading into it. And it just, I don't know, it just had a really, I don't know about you, Murph, I really felt that showed it very well. And we did it fairly simply, but it was difficult to then craft everyone around it.
Yeah, that was the one clearly that the background and a lot of background were a lot more in proximity to the cast as we were moving the camera through these things. There were some scenes on the back lot where we had obviously the actors walking through the back lot and having dialogue scenes. But we had maybe I think at the most 70 background on the back lot, and we incorporated some crew members in as themselves, like as craftsmen to up the count a bit here and there, but there was a lot more space to work with in these alleys of Warner Brothers and incorporating the background into it. And that was a lot of fun to do too. But in the Golden Globes, because it's such a crowded, almost claustrophobic event to go through and to arrive at, working Mark's blocking in with the actors and the extras was a little bit more challenging because there was less room for error because there's so many people packed into the space. But to keep the flow of the show the same, it was a lot of fun and challenging to set. And we brought on a couple of additional ADs, both named Michelle, to help me with and Denise and Sam, who's one of our PAs, to set all that. And we just gave them individual areas to focus on, and then as Mark moved through the areas, AD would kind of control the background. And it really worked out well. And it's probably the episode, quite honestly, that I'm the most proud of because there were so many people, 250 to 500 people, depending on the day, and trying to make it look like the gala, to make it look accurate. And that's the one thing that is based on real reality of Hollywood, that's a real event. And so, yeah, I think we pulled it off pretty well.
I totally agree with you. I really felt like they absolutely knocked it out of the park. It was fantastic.
Yeah, even Seth, I had heard he was like he was nervous. Seth never looks nervous, but he said he came into that day, the first day, which is the first thing we did was the arrival, because we had to work around the Hilton schedule, so we had a window of the afternoon because he arrives during the day and he leaves at night, so we had to do the arrival during the day because we're outside. And he came into that day a little nervous about how this was going to be pulled off because it was clearly one of our biggest days on set as far as the number of people we had, because the background count was so high. And I was flattered to hear that as the first day ended and we got through the arrival and the leaving, which we had to get done because we had to strike the set. That's another thing I'll go into in a second. But after we finished the day, someone told me that he said he couldn't believe how it just felt like another day on set, like we were shooting on stage. Even we had all the people and all the logistics and craziness going on. He says it just went really well, and I was really happy to hear that. But that's another thing. That day, the art department had to come in after midnight, I think it was, on the day we were shooting. So they came in, they built the exterior set. They put all of that into place. All the Golden Globe signage, the red carpet, all that stuff had to go into place. We had to shoot it that afternoon, and then we had to shoot it that night for them leaving, and then they had to strike it after we wrapped. So they had the 24-hour window to dress the set, shoot both sets, or shoot day, shoot night, and strike in 24 hours. Because that's what the Hilton allowed us to do. And the art department did a great job.
I've never been to the Golden Globes, but it feels like being behind the scenes there. Like it really does all come together.
Hey, Mark, maybe we'll get to go to the Golden Globes if we get money.
Yeah, you might be able to. I would say that it's a real testament to the whole cast that were involved in that whole process. It was incredible, and I think Zoe Kravitz needs a shout out as well. She really did put in an incredible effort as well. So, and I was lucky to reunite with Zoe after I worked with her many years ago on Mad Max Fury Road, and we hadn't worked with each other since then. And I was really delighted to have this opportunity to work with her, and she was just really wonderful. And I think as actress, she's also molded into an incredibly mature, amazing, interesting, and has a good, amazing range. I didn't realize she could do comedy so well, and it's really, a testament to her ability. Yeah,
Yeah, it really came out in episodes 9 and 10 too. She was really funny.
yeah, it's fantastic.
Well, the other thing that strikes me about episode 8 is while the show throughout has people playing versions of themselves, episode 8 is that on steroids. I'm curious, Murph, if there's anything different about a show when you have that many people coming in these sort of guest spots, or again, if it's just, I don't know, they're just playing roles like any other film set.
I think it's the latter. I think they're just playing roles like any other film set. And I loved how game the actors were. And I think once they got there, they didn't really know what to expect. Some people came in and had bigger parts, playing themselves, Zoe being the perfect example because she's got a substantial role in 3 episodes. But someone like, say, Gene Smart or Aaron Sorkin or some of the others that came for the Golden Globes, they'd come in for 2 hours. Seth and Evan were always very accommodating of these people who are willing to give their time for very little money. Ultimately, I think they always wanted us to be very well prepared to like shoot them as quickly and efficiently as possible, and we did that. I recognized that importance as an AD, that when someone like Gene comes in or Aaron comes in to give 2 hours of their time, that you don't want to waste it. So I plan things a little bit more rigidly in my head, anyways, to make sure that they're in and out as quickly as possible. But once they got a feel for Seth and Evan and the way the set was going and the way they like to run things, I think they probably would have spent the whole day there. I think they just enjoyed. I think they enjoyed doing something different, like coming in there and playing a heightened version of themselves. Like Zoe, I don't know that I don't think she was originally going to be in the last 2 episodes, and I think she had such a good time doing the Golden Globes that she wanted to come back, and so they wrote her in to bring her back for the last episode, and they wrote a big part for her in the last 2 episodes, because it's all part of the same thread of Continental and working on these pretend movies that they're making. So it makes sense to have them recur throughout the season. Nick Stoller's another example. He's in episode 1, he's in episode 4, he's in whatever it is, he comes back constantly.
And also Dave Franco as well was
Dave, exactly. Yeah. But I don't treat it any differently. Do you know what I mean? It's just planning and scheduling time and around their availability. Like I said, they drove it. They weren't coming in, I'm only going to be there for an hour. It was more just like, okay, Gene Smart's coming, so let's accommodate her as best we can and fit her into a short window.
Unless you're anticipating that Martin Scorsese, you said, may need extra handling, but it turns out he didn't either. And that once you got through that on the first episode, then it sounds like things just start falling into place.
Yeah, and we also had Steve Buscemi come in for that scene, and Charlize. Mark's worked with her before. Obviously, he mentioned Fury Road, so he knew her well, and that was another nice reunion I remember watching happen in real time when she was on set. But she was there for such a short time. She comes in and she, get the fuck out of my party, and she's Charlize Theron, Academy Award winning actress, and she comes in because she knew Seth because they had worked together and formed a nice relationship with him on set as actors together, and she agreed to just come over for 6 hours to hang out and deliver one line, and she was totally cool about it. I think the second season, I'm sure there's going to be actors lining up to be in it, whereas they were like, oh, we got to get this person, we got to get in. They constantly were like, oh, we're going to get A actor, oh, they're not available, oh, we're going to go to B, oh, they're not available, we're going to go to C, and then eventually they landed on somebody. I think this time it's going to be 4 actors wanting to play the part as opposed to going through 4 actors to find the right one. So that'll be fun to see.
Well, as you alluded to, Murph, the show has been renewed for a second season. Apple's very happy with it. Anything you know about what to expect? Any hints about where this story is going to go? You guys planning to be part of it?
I don't know what there were some episode ideas that came up during the first season that everybody was kind of the showrunners and Seth, Evan, were likely to do. I don't want to spoil anything. That's I'll leave that to the people who I'll leave that to the producers to pass that information along. But some of the ideas are very, very funny. Obviously, I certainly would love to come back. I don't know the timing of it at all. I just know it was renewed. I assume it's going to be something maybe in the fall. It just really depends on if something else comes up for me in the meantime. I don't know. But yeah, I would love to come back if they'll have me. Yeah, after my performance in episode 1, they may not opt to bring me back, but we'll see.
What's your scene, Murph? Because people go back and watch that specifically. I want to go catch you.
Oh, it's in episode
I
1.
like to remain incognito. They don't know what I look like in this. If you were showing us in this podcast, they could spot me. The opening scene of the series when Peter Berg and Paul Dano are having a conversation after the shot cuts, the little action beat we did to open the show. And I play the AD in that scene, and I just am helping a transition camera from their dialogue to introduce Seth for the first time. And I say something arbitrary that I say on set all the time. But yeah, it was fun.
Yeah.
Mark, you might know more about second season because you just work with Seth and Adam, and they maybe discussed it a little bit. I don't have any details.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I can really. I mean, they definitely bounced around some ideas of what they're thinking of doing, and I think it's it's very exciting what they're looking at trying to pull off, and I think they're only just going to keep building on what they've done in season 1 and take it even more into some crazy antics that go on in Hollywood, and I think they're just going to lean into that, and then also I imagine they're going to carry the story through for Matt Remick, and his journey as the leader of this studio. So yeah, I think it will be amazing to see what they come up with for the ideas for season 2. I'm excited.
Yeah, I think it'll go further than they did season 1 too, because now they're on a roll.
Well, while we're waiting for that, where are we going to see your guys' work next?
I had a wonderful time. Straight after the studio, I went and worked with the director, Dan Trachtenberg, working with him on Predator Badlands, which is coming out in November in the same world as the other Predator movies. Dan, he directed Prey, and it's sort of like a follow-on from that. I had a really wonderful time. We shot down in New Zealand, and that's looking good. I saw the trailer actually last night in IMAX. Good to see that on the big screen, and so that's coming out soon. And then I worked also on another movie straight after called Wrecking Crew, which was an action comedy with Jason Momoa and Dave Bautista, and that's looking to come out a little bit later on. Yeah, again, it was fun to work on with that. And hopefully we'll see season 2 coming up. Yeah, who knows? If I'm lucky to be asked back.
Fingers crossed. How about you, Murph?
Since the studio ended, I've had a couple of possibilities that didn't come through because the business is obviously in a bit of a funk. I know there are a lot of people out there suffering and haven't worked for some time. I have some friends, unfortunately, that have had to make the decision to retire from the business because they couldn't afford to stay in it. They needed to start collecting a pension through their unions or what have you, and they've relocated out of Los Angeles. So the business is really hurting. And I have a couple of possibilities coming up, the studio perhaps being one of them. Again, we'll see what happens with that as far as the timing and whether or not I'm asked back. But there's some other shows that I'm considering. And again, it's just a matter of whether or not they happen. I've been in this position before in the past year where I've had a couple of leads and I thought they were going to go, and for some reason or another, they haven't. So it's just the time just gets away from you sometimes, and you think you're going to be out of work for 6 weeks or 2 months, and sometimes it ends up being longer. And this is one of those rare occasions where it's been an extended time off. So I'm just enjoying the time with my family and for now, and trying to figure out what it would be like to be retired because I'm approaching that point in my career. And yeah, this past year or so has given me an idea of what that would feel like, and it's not a bad thing.
Well, Murph, I actually appreciate you bringing it up because as much fun as we have talking about these shows and the work that's going on, we do like to recognize that things are very difficult out there, and a lot of people are looking for work, and there's just not as many projects to go. And so, listener, if you fall into that camp, we see you, and we're wishing you luck. On that note, though, we will call it a wrap. Great having you guys both here. This was a lot of fun. Thank you.
Thank you. I was glad to be part of it.
Yeah, it was awesome, man. Thank you. It's finally nice to have a long chat about something that I was really proud to be part of.
Well, you're both welcome back. Hope to see you again. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Listeners, I always appreciate your feedback. You'll find my contact info at our website, belowtheline.biz. That's B-I-Z. You'll also find more than 260 past episodes, so if you're a new listener, check out the catalog. Closing credits, thanks to Curtis Five for our music, John Wan for our logo, and to all of our listeners, I appreciate you. If you're a fan of Below the Line, consider a purchase. The logo is available on t-shirts, mugs, and stickers at redbubble.com. Other ways you can help. First, give us a positive rating wherever you get your podcasts. Second, tell your friends about an episode you enjoyed, because that's how we gain new listeners. All of that aside, whatever your engagement, the fact that you're still listening means a lot to me. Thanks again from Below the Line.